Chapter 141, 139. New member of the disciplinary group, Cedric Diggory, Hufflepuff's shining star, was unquestionably the top student in his fourth year, a fact even his Slytherin peers admitted. He earned outstanding in every subject with effortless ease. Every professor who taught him, even Professor Snape, spoke highly of him. He was level-headed, talented, and carried himself with quiet elegance. To many, he embodied everything people expected of a Hogwarts student. He was enormously popular in Hufflepuff, the pride of his house. In Slytherin terms, he was as highly regarded as Dudley was among his followers. In the original tournament controversies in Goblet of Fire, when other students wore Potter Stinks badges because they misunderstood Harry's path to becoming a champion, Cedric had been the one to persuade his friends to remove their badges. When Harry confided in him about the first task, Cedric remained fair and upright, even giving a hint about the second task to preserve a spirit of honest competition. Excellent, principled, and fair, these were the qualities that made him Dudley's first candidate for the disciplinary group. They were exactly what the group needed. The selection took place in one of the cleared rooms in Slytherin House, now almost empty, save for a single table. Your charms foundation is very solid, your defense against the dark arts is excellent, and your transfiguration insights are unique. What you need now is steady practice and time to grow, Dudley said, ticking off notes while Hermione sat at the table behind him, recording everything on parchment. Cedric, breathless, tried to respond. His wand hand trembled slightly. Sweat stood on his forehead and dampened his robes. He looked exhausted. In truth, Dudley had not even personally tested him. Neither Dudley nor Hermione was the examiner. The examiner wasn't even human. It was a Cornish pixie, hovering in the air between them. The pixie clicked its tiny fingers and conjured a small whirlwind. "Last test," Dudley said. "Find a way to calm it. This should be simple for you." Cedric raised his wand. As an all-around excellent student, his knowledge of magical creatures was strong. He knew the general nuisance level of Cornish pixies. Mischief makers, usually defeated by a simple charm. Yet whatever magic animated this particular pixie made it far more robust than one would expect. Cedric thought it the most powerful such creature he had ever encountered. It was the sort of thing only someone truly skilled could have created, worthy, perhaps, of the title King of Slytherin. The whirlwind it made was not terribly strong, and Cedric quieted it with a few precise motions. "Back, pixie. You did very well," he murmured. A red light washed over the pixie, and it vanished. A small red and white orb appeared at Cedric's waist and fastened itself there. Dudley turned to him. "Congratulations. You passed. You're now a member of the disciplinary group. I expect you'll help keep Hogwarts in order." "Mr. Dursley, thank you for your guidance," Cedric said, bowing with sincere respect. "I won't let you down." Dudley patted his shoulder in an encouraging, almost paternal way. "Don't waste your talent." Though Dudley was 2 years younger than Cedric, and Cedric was technically his senior, there was no awkwardness in the exchange. To an outsider, it felt entirely natural. 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Meet on the lawn outside the castle. You know where." Dudley's tone was businesslike. "Yes." Hermione stepped forward and handed Dudley a thick sheaf of parchment. "I've compiled his information. I can deliver it to Headmaster Dumbledore whenever you like." "You're a great help, Hermione." Dudley accepted the papers. "We can't rely on just a handful of us. The disciplinary group needs more capable people." He wasn't saying that so others could do the work for him. He knew full well that every leader needed capable allies. Even the most powerful wizards in history had followers. Grindelwald had his supporters, Voldemort his Death Eaters. Cedric's excellence was one reason he'd been chosen. Another was his house. If Hufflepuff could be represented, perhaps the other houses would be more willing to join too. After leaving the headmaster's office, Dudley headed straight for his dormitory. The ruby-like ring on his index finger glowed faintly as he pushed the door open. Inside, a small, scrawny creature was trapped in a transfiguration array Dudley had constructed with a tangle of magical apparatus. The creature had enormous, bat-like ears, bulging eyes the size of tennis balls, and a long, pointed nose like Pinocchio's. It was unmistakably a house elf, one of the same kind that worked in the Hogwarts kitchens. By tradition, These house elves descend from the brownies of Scottish folklore, little domestic spirits dressed in ragged brown garments, eager to live in harmony with humans and to help with household chores. They do not accept pay to perform their work. Offer them wages, and they will disappear, and deliberately try to deprive them, and they will vanish as well. The elf snapped its fingers desperately, as if trying to cast a spell to escape, but the transfiguration array was calibrated to suppress house elf magic and block their attempts at spell work. Dudley watched it struggling and, with a sneer, said, "I never thought house elves moonlighted as thieves." Chapter 142, The Thief Who Snuck into the Room. "Speak, thief. What are you doing here?" Dudley stared down at him. "Confess honestly, and it'll be easier on you." The creature let out a high, panicked squeak. "Dobby is not a thief. Dobby only wanted to take away that dangerous thing." "You're Dobby." Dudley straightened, looking down. "What did you want to take?" "Dobby cannot say. Harry Potter's in danger. The Dursleys are good people. They took in the Savior Potter. Dobby cannot hurt them." With that, the house elf flung his head hard against the floor with a dull crack. "Bad Dobby! Bad Dobby!" The words were muddled, but Dudley could piece them together. "You were trying to protect Harry? Harry Potter is very great. He beat the one whose name cannot be spoken. Even among house elves, Lord Voldemort's name was a fearsome thing." Dudley had heard enough of the old stories. Voldemort's reign had been a nightmare of murders. "Someone's tried to harm Harry Potter? Hogwarts is too dangerous. Bad Dobby! Bad Dobby!" Dobby began to bang his head on the floor again. Dudley thought of Harry's recent string of bad luck and felt an odd sting. "You were helping Harry in your own way, weren't you? Hogwarts is dangerous. Harry Potter mustn't stay there." He wouldn't outright admit it, but his words left little doubt. Dudley let out a short, bitter laugh. So Harry's latest misfortune had been engineered. "Tell me this, are you acting on your own or on orders from your master?" House elves were bound to obey their masters. The answer would matter. Dobby's large, anxious eyes flicked up. "The old master hates Harry Potter. The young master doesn't know. Dobby cannot stand by and watch Harry get into trouble. Bad Dobby, bad Dobby." "So it's your personal decision," Dudley said, shifting the subject. "Were you the one who messed up my bedroom? Don't you know, touching a wizard's things without permission is very dangerous." Thump, thump, thump. Dobby kept smashing his head against the floor. Dudley had to smother a grin. House elves' skulls were tough, or the little elf would have concussed himself by now. "Enough," he snapped. Annoyed by the creature's penitent theatrics, Dudley asked, "Last question, who is your master?" "Dobby cannot say." Dobby snapped his fingers. For an instant, Dudley thought the elf was trying to apparate away. He'd tested house elves before and knew the limits of their magic. But this time, nothing happened. No vanishing, no smoke. The enchantment Dudley had set in the room held firm. "Dobby is leaving. Goodbye, Mr. Dursley," the elf squeaked, as if the spell would spite him. Dudley had studied house elves, borrowing information from the castle kitchens. They were different from wizards, yes, but not invincible. Their magic worked differently. They could be powerful, but not all of them were unstoppable. On the battlefield at Hogwarts, house elves had been brave, but they wielded pots and pans like cooks. A pixie swarm could overwhelm a single Death Eater. Against focused opposition, they could be contained. Yet this Dobby felt different, strong-willed, unusually skilled. Dudley found himself more curious than ever. This was no ordinary kitchen elf. This one might be elite. Then, Dudley trailed off, studying him, and the room answered. A Cornish pixie fluttered into view, buzzing like an angry fly. Dudley snapped his fingers, and the little demon, tamed and trained, responded immediately. As Dobby tried nervously to snap his own fingers, pale blue dust sparkled from his fingertips and fizzled uselessly. The anti-apparition wards Dudley had planted held. Dobby's magic, targeted and suppressed, was blunted. "Trying to leave won't work," Dudley said flatly. "You can't apparate or disapparate in here." If a house elf's magic was singled out, their advantage diminished sharply. Dudley had learned that and set the countermeasures. He flicked his eyes to the pixie. "Your magic isn't any better than his." The pixie, enhanced by a taming charm Dudley had used, hovered and buzzed with surprising ferocity. It was a rare success, an evolved animal among many ordinary ones. Dudley felt almost proud. Too bad there was only one like it. Dobby's face crumpled at Dudley's next words. Let me guess, your name is Dobby, you're a house elf, and you have an old master and a young master. Then you're from the Malfoy family, Dudley finished. The elf startled, eyes wider than before. Only wealthy, pure-blood houses owned house elves, and Malfoys were a small, notorious list. Dudley didn't need many clues. Dobby didn't say anything. Bad Dobby, bad Dobby. The elf banged his head against the cabinet this time. Contracts bound house elves to their masters unless the tie was explicitly broken. Dobby's refusal to speak was hardly surprising. Dudley guessed at the rest. That dangerous thing you mentioned, was it this? A step in the floor rose, and on it sat a dark, gelatinous lump. The remains of the diary lay there, inert and black. Dobby let out a delighted, relieved squeal. Mr. Dursley actually destroyed the old masters. Conspiracy. Harry Potter is safe, the elf declared. Harry's always been safe, Dudley said with a different meaning. But lately he's been in danger because of certain people. His tone carried an edge Dobby didn't quite catch. Dudley thought of Harry's ruined first romantic hopes and felt a flash of wry pity. Maybe it was too petty, but he couldn't help it. It's all the old master's doing. Dobby's ears flattened. Dobby cannot speak ill of his master. Bad Dobby. Bad Dobby. He moved to bang his head on the wall again, but Dudley stopped him with a hand. Dobby, Dudley said softly, surprisingly earnest, you aren't ordinary. You have your own will. Tell me, do you want freedom? The elf blinked as if the idea had never occurred before. Dudley held the pause, considering his next words. I think we can make a deal. Chapter 143. The World's First Wizard Tournament, Quidditch Pitch, Hogwarts. Today, the stands were unusually empty, just a scattering of students here and there. Normally, when any of the four houses trained, the pitch would be ringed with young wizards. Quidditch was their favorite sport. George, the beater, nudged his captain with an elbow. Hey, Wood, what day is it today? Did everyone go off to take their OWLs? The date's not right, is it? Wood only glanced at him. He didn't answer, but the sour look on his face made it obvious he knew exactly why the stands were so bare. Train hard. In 2 days we've got Slytherin. Don't lose. A cheer erupted from outside the pitch. The few spectators who had come to watch straightened, grabbed their things, and rushed out of the stadium, leaving the team even more deflated. Great, not a single spectator left, George groaned, clutching his broom. This ruins our motivation to train. It wasn't really about the lack of an audience. George was sulking because everyone else seemed to know what had drawn the crowd, everyone except him. So what happened? He asked quietly. George, you don't know? Fred, his twin, said, incredulous. Fred, you know? George stared at him. Of all people, Fred had been told? Fred grinned. Of course, little Angelina just told me. Oh, little Angelina, George dragged out the words, looking at his brother with a mixture of envy and exasperation. He was well aware Fred was courting Angelina. Fred said, smug, hey, George, don't call her little Angelina. She might end up as your sister-in-law. Why can't she be my brother's wife? George shot back. Because I'm older than you, Fred said, deadpan. Do you want to take off your trousers and compare? Focus on training, Wood barked, cutting off the bickering before it spiraled further. The nickname Tyrant Wood fit. The ordinarily mild-mannered captain turned into a strict disciplinarian when Quidditch was at stake. Seriously, what's happening? George pressed. It's the first wizard card tournament, being held at Hogwarts today, Katie Bell answered. Like Angelina, Katie was a Gryffindor chaser and one of the first to return from the crowd, breathless with the news. Wizard card tournament? George wailed. Everyone's gone to watch wizard card instead of Quidditch? Not every young wizard loved Quidditch, but almost every one of them knew a trick or two with wizard cards. The tournament was a bigger draw than a routine practice. I want to go too, George murmured. Me too, Fred echoed. Train, all of you. Captain Wood roared again. We play Slytherin in 2 days. Don't slack off. The great hall had been transformed. The longhouse tables were gone, replaced by individual desks with stools on either side. A huge banner hung in the center, the world's first wizard tournament. Although, on closer inspection, a small word had been squeezed between wizard and tournament, card. From afar, however, the banner simply proclaimed the world's first wizard tournament, and people craned their necks to see what it would mean. Wizards of all ages packed the hall, buzzing with expectation. Even Dumbledore had been drawn in. He had assumed the event would be no more than a dueling club-sized gathering, but the turnout was far greater. Luckily, this first wizard card tournament had been staged as a pilot at Hogwarts. Had it been open to the whole wizarding world, the castle seating would never have sufficed. "I am Caro," the man on the stage announced. "Many of you know me. A year ago, I was a 7th year at Hogwarts. Now I am president of the Witch and Poison Publishing House. It is an honor to be here." Caro, one of the organizers, spoke with practiced ease. It was his job to sell the spectacle. Tournaments and large prizes were exactly the sort of thing that could extend the popularity and profitability of Wizard Card. Dudley, Caro seemed to imply, would take his cut. Running events with good prize money meant they could keep the game alive and profitable. "So," Caro declared, "I hereby open the world's first Wizard Card tournament. Matches will be decided by drawing lots," he added, and the hall erupted. From below, Lockhart couldn't resist. He pushed toward the front, all charm and false humility. "My students, don't forget, I'm exceptionally good at Wizard Card," he crowed. "In a bit, I'll publish a new book, My Unspeakable Secrets with Wizard Card. If you want to learn my techniques, it'll be available after the match." Lockhart had been shut out of organizing duties. When he had suggested collaborating, Caro had refused. But Lockhart was nothing if not resourceful in seeking the limelight. If he couldn't claim the role of host, he would try to shine as a contestant. Nothing in the rules barred professors from entering. "Lockhart? He absolutely can't win," someone nearby scoffed. Ron, who had entered the tournament for the prize money, muttered about the purse. 500 galleons. For any young wizard, that was a fortune. Caro had originally proposed 1,000, but Dudley vetoed it. 500 would have to do for now. "Don't be too cocky, Ron. His deck's actually very good," Draco Malfoy warned, not out of sportsmanship, but because he loved to provoke. The matches began. Despite the doubts and the jokes, Lockhart's theatrics were backed by a surprisingly polished deck. He breezed through his first match with the kind of luck and flourish that delighted an already feverish crowd. Chapter 144. "But what should I do if I take this out, sir?" Ron repeated in disbelief as the referee declared the winner. He couldn't understand it. "How could Lockhart possibly beat Pegasus?" he muttered. "Pegasus's deck is no weaker than mine." Pegasus of Ravenclaw favored decks themed around cartoon mythology. Most people simply couldn't match him. Malfoy, however, smirked and said in a patronizing lecturing tone, "Ronald, everyone has their strengths. You can't judge everything with the same old eyes. Our professor's skin is thicker than it looks, and his wits are sharp." Ron bristled at the tone and made a mental note to give Malfoy a lesson later. Still, Malfoy had a point. Lockhart did have a peculiar resilience. Just because he could be all talk didn't mean he was completely talentless. He'd graduated top of Ravenclaw, after all. On the other side of the bracket, Neville had also pulled off a victory with his plant-themed deck. Ron's own deck relied on prediction and was heavily luck-based. When luck was on his side, it was like cheating. He could sweep through opponents and topple even the best decks. When luck turned, though, even a poorly constructed deck could trounce him. Today, luck had been fickle. He barely scraped past his first-round opponent. Hermione won her match, too. Her deck was a hybrid that demanded intense calculation and concentration. By the way, Dudley had provided the decks for everyone in the disciplinary group. He himself was the only member who didn't join the tournament, partly because he wasn't interested, and partly because his own deck was too powerful for such a casual event. He had no desire to trample the younger students. With so many entrants, the pace of the competition was brisk. Most of the younger wizards weren't particularly skilled at Wizard Card, so the rounds moved quickly. A few hours later, the top 8 were decided. Winner, Harry Potter. Harry was the first into the semifinals. He'd brought a dark arts deck, the most powerful of the lot, but also the most complex to master. It required a solid grounding in dark arts and toxic lore to unlock its true potential. Dark magic was potent and costly. Without deep understanding, a player could easily get stuck and squander the deck's strength. Wizard Card might look like a simple game, but it concealed a great deal of arcane knowledge. Only truly skilled wizards could get the most out of it. The crowd buzzed. As expected of Mr. Potter, what was that dark arts barrier he just used? The Fiendfire Curse. That's a high-level spell. I heard about it. A demonic flame only advanced dark wizards can control. He's been hiding his strength all along. The Slytherins watched Harry with a new kind of respect. In their eyes, he was already a bona fide dark wizard. Denying it would be as absurd as saying Mr. Dursley couldn't do magic. Lockhart made the semi-finals as well, his deck unpredictable and theatrical. Ron occupied the third slot, and to everyone's surprise, the fourth was Percy Weasley, Ron's older brother. Malfoy had run into Ron earlier and thought he'd already sealed the win. His strategy had been flawless, his advantage building steadily, until Ron drew an absurd card out of nowhere and comboed him out. Malfoy was still furious. Prediction deck? That's cheating, he fumed. Hermione met Harry in the quarters. Harry's explosive, burst-style play simply overwhelmed her methodical, calculation-heavy approach. She lost without much regret. She'd participated mainly to pass the time. Neville had the misfortune of drawing Lockhart. His straightforward, plant-based strategies were easily baited and punished. Dudley had summed it up earlier. If nothing weird happens, the final will be Harry versus Lockhart. Ron's deck was too volatile to be a consistent champion unless luck smiled on him throughout. Percy's deck, though solid and conventional, lacked the special qualities to stand up to either Harry or Lockhart. Events unfolded just as Dudley expected. In the semifinals, Ron ran out of luck and lost to Lockhart. He couldn't draw what he needed and was dominated. Percy, as predicted, fell to Harry. He simply didn't have the edge to stop Harry's powerful offense. So the final was set. Harry Potter versus Gilderoy Lockhart. They sat at opposite ends of the arena. Harry won the coin toss and chose to go first. My turn. Draw card. Summon. Dark Magician Girl. From the card surfaced a small, chibi-like girl with a wand, one of the most beloved figures in dark arts decks, popular with every age and gender. In a world where photos moved and wizard chess pieces could shatter opponents, it was perfectly reasonable for a card to project a virtual image. Draw card. Fortune favored Harry. He pulled two powerful hero cards on his first turn. Summon. Dark Magician. Activate Dark Magic. Combo card. Fiendfire Curse. Black, demonic flames poured from the Dark Magician's wand, spreading across the board with a terrifying, all-consuming heat. The crowd erupted. That's it! Potter's strongest magic! That Fiendfire is no joke. I thought only high-level dark wizards could control it. It was nearly the perfect opening hand. One couldn't attack on the first turn, so Harry finished after setting his plays. Yet Lockhart betrayed no panic. Uncharacteristically composed, he smiled and admitted, "I'll give you this, Potter. Your Fiendfire is impressive, and your Dark Magician is formidable. But if I counter with these character cards, Harry, how do you plan to respond?" With a flourish, Lockhart reached for his own trump card and prepared to play it. Summon. The arena held its breath as he readied his declaration. Chapter 145, 143. The Ghostly Female Voice, the Open Chamber of Secrets. Summon Urius. Summon Demigra. Summon Palpatine. Summon Nicholas Flamel. Lockhart called 4 famous wizards in a single breath. These were valuable wizard cards he had acquired at great cost. Activate Magic. Protego Totalum. Among defensive spells, this was a powerful one. With enough magic power, it could outmatch a simple shield charm. Activate Magic. Eternal Freeze. If any spell could rival the Fiendfire Curse, it was this. An incredible freezing magic capable of solidifying everything it touched. It was the perfect counter to Fiendfire. You, Harry Potter, had only 2 powerful hero cards and 1 spell, while I had 4 cards and 2 spells, and every wizard I summoned was a renowned figure. The rule on wizard cards said fame often meant strength, with the occasional exception for special character cards. Lockhart leaned back confidently, watching Harry's tactical retreat. This time, he thought, victory was certain. Under relentless pressure, Harry's Dark Magician Girl and the Black Magician were quickly overwhelmed, and the Fiendfire Curse, the trump card, was broken by the Eternal Freeze. Still, to Lockhart's surprise, Harry did not panic. Activate Trap card. Call of the Vile Helpo. Sacrifice Dark Magician Girl and Black Magician from the graveyard. Summon Blue Fiendfire. Special summon White Wizard Dumbledore. When Dumbledore appeared, glowing white and wielding blue Fiendfire, Lockhart's alliance of 4 powerful wizards collapsed instantly. There was no rule that a dark arts deck couldn't summon White Wizard Dumbledore. If the conditions were met, he could be called. Lockhart pushed to turn the tide, but his efforts were mercilessly crushed. The hero card Dumbledore's arrival sealed the match. "Professor Lockhart, it seems I've won." Harry proclaimed victory, standing like a conqueror. The outcome was decided. Dudley's ears twitched. He had the sensation he was hearing something other than the sounds in the Great Hall, an almost imperceptible rustling, like someone whispering. "Dudley, what's wrong?" Hermione asked, spotting him dazed. As Hermione spoke, the rustling stopped, as if Dudley had only imagined it. "I hope I misheard," he said, thoughtful. Not long after, one of the contestants broke away from the crowd. "Tsk! What a wizard card tournament, so boring." He spoke with disdain, but his eyes were fixed on Harry and the others on the stage, a flash of envy betraying him. Cormac McLaggen, who had entered confidently then been knocked out in the first round, had watched the final battle to the end. He stood and walked out of the Great Hall. A boring competition, boring people. Alone in a corridor, Cormac kicked at stray pebbles and muttered, "Why didn't I win? I'm clearly better." Suddenly, Cal Mike heard a soft female laugh. He glanced toward the sound and caught a flash of someone passing by, long golden hair. Without thinking, he followed. He couldn't explain his impulse. It felt as if the other person wanted him to. He almost ran, trying to catch a glimpse, but each time he was a hair's breadth off, seeing only a thread of gold. His curiosity grew with every step, and he ran on until he lost track of time. After rounding a corner, the figure vanished. The floor underfoot felt damp. There was a small puddle. Cal Mike hesitated, then moved closer. Between two windows, a faint shimmer on the wall caught his eye. He leaned in, squinting into the torchlight. A line of words, smeared and faintly gleaming, ran along the wall a foot above the floor. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." The red writing looked as if it had been written in blood. Hanging beneath the message was a dark, furry shadow. Cal Mike stepped closer and realized it was a stiff, dead cat, Madame Norris, Filch's cat. He stumbled backward and fell. His hands slid into the puddle at his feet. The liquid was sticky and smelled sharp. He held his hands up to the torchlight and understood with dawning horror that it was not water, but fresh, bright red blood. Whose blood? Who had been killed? His head buzzed, his mind went blank, and he froze. The first wizard card tournament had just ended. The young wizards were leaving the Great Hall and heading toward the dining room. Cal Mike was only a short distance from the entrance. The murmurs of the crowd, like distant thunder, grew louder as they converged on the corridor. From both ends came the sound of countless footsteps and the high, excited chatter as students relived the matches. The tournament had been a success. Everyone remembered the gleaming galleon in the winner's hand and looked forward to the next contest. They rounded the corner in a press of bodies and went silent. Cal Mike, covered in blood, sat in the middle of the corridor. The students pressed forward, staring at the horror. 1,000 screams burst out, ringing through the castle. What happened here? What happened? Argus Filch came running, hands over his ears, drawn by the screams. He forced his way through the crowd and, seeing the blood-red writing and Madame Norris hanging beneath it, stumbled back. His eyes went wide and wet. He clutched his face in terror. "No, Madame Norris! What is this?" His voice rose into a shriek. Then Filch's gaze fell on Cal Mike, soaked in blood. "You! It was you! You killed my cat. You killed her. I'll kill you. I'll make you pay with your life." Filch's furious roar echoed down the empty corridor. Chapter 146, 144. Actually, I have a mandrake right here. Filch was about to come to blows with Cal Mike when Dumbledore hurried over, followed by several professors. He flicked his wand and gently freed Madame Norris from the torch bracket. "Prefects, take everyone to the Great Hall. Argus, professors will go together, and you as well, Mr. McLaggen." "I think you should tell us exactly what you saw," Dumbledore added, turning to Caro. Caro had already graduated and was no longer a Hogwarts student. It would have been natural for him to step away from the scene, but he only shrugged. "It's all right, Professor Dumbledore." He indicated, with a small gesture, that he understood. The disciplinary group should come too. Dumbledore glanced at Dudley, not refusing, simply nodding. Discipline was the disciplinary group's responsibility. "Then, Mr. Dursley, come with us." He did not call for Harry or the other students. "My office is just upstairs," Dumbledore said to the gathered teachers. "We can." "Thank you, Gilderoy," he added dryly as Lockhart offered to help. The laughter in the man's eyes faded into memory. Lockhart's classroom was festooned with portraits of himself, in all sorts of poses and outfits. Dudley silently wondered how anyone could be so vain, to stare at their own likeness every day. Dumbledore set Madame Norris on Lockhart's spotless desk and began to examine her carefully. K.L. Mike crouched in a corner, trembling and trying to make himself small. Filch stood off to the side, wiping his face with his sleeve. The other professors held various expressions: concern, curiosity, consternation, but Lockhart alone looked positively delighted. Perhaps he was excited at the thought of a dramatic rescue. Perhaps he was simply thrilled to be central to any event. "It must have been a charm that did this," Lockhart declared theatrically. "Very likely a transfiguration torture charm. I've seen such things before. It's a pity I wasn't present. I happen to know the countercurse and his grandstanding made Filch's sobs deeper. "No, Madame Norris. No, I can't lose you," he cried, large tears tracking down his face. His devotion to the cat was unmistakable. Dudley stepped forward and clapped the caretaker gently on the shoulder. "Mr. Filch, she's not dead," Dudley said. Filch looked at him, hopeful and desperate. "How do you know? There's blood, and her muscles are stiff. She's frozen, some freezing charm after death." Lockhart bristled at Dudley's assurance. "Believe me, I've seen more." "That's chicken blood," Dudley cut him off without meeting Lockhart's eye. He had been the one to examine the wound. Dumbledore put a calming hand on the older man's shoulder. "She has been petrified," he said. "We must determine how, but Mr. Filch, do try to be calm." With Dumbledore's assessment, Filch sagged with relief, but his attention snapped back to K.L. Mike. "He must know," he accused, glaring. "No, I don't know anything," K.L. Mike babbled, shaking. He was plainly terrified. "Argus, calm yourself," Dumbledore said gently. "This is not the work of a third-year wizard." Filch's grief turned to fury. "My cat is petrified," he shrieked, eyes wild. "I want to see someone punished." At that moment, Dudley produced a small vial and let a single drop fall onto the rigid fur of Madame Norris. A faint curl of black vapor rose, carrying a barely perceptible stink. Professor Snape leaned in at once. "What did you find?" he asked, watching with a keen, assessing look. He seemed pleased with Dudley. The boy's skill with potions reminded him of Lily, of the brilliance Snape had once admired. Dudley grasped potion techniques quickly, and in only a year had begun to display his own touch. If he were older, Snape thought, he might pour out everything he had to him. "It's not an ordinary petrification charm, and it's not the dark arts," Dudley said. Snape's expression shifted. A hypothesis formed. "You mean?" "Yes, Professor," Dudley confirmed. "It appears she was petrified by the petrifying ability of some magical creature." "Very likely," Dumbledore agreed. Dudley's explanation eased a crease from the headmaster's forehead. If a creature's natural power had caused the condition, that accounted for much of the evidence. "Please save her. Mr. Dursley, you should be able to. You care for her so much, please." Filch begged between sobs, astounding everyone by imploring a student first. Dumbledore crouched to Filch's level. "We will cure her, Argus," he promised. "Professor Sprout recently acquired some mandrakes. Once they mature, their potion can restore Madame Norris." "Professor Dumbledore." Dudley interrupted, in a voice that left no room for disbelief. "I actually have a mature mandrake right here." He unhooked another red and white charm from his belt, different from the small pixie he had earlier. With a brief flash, a small, human-formed mandrake appeared. It looked like an infant, blinking and yawning as it took in its surroundings. For a moment it seemed confused, then, as if realizing where it was, it let out a frightened shriek and scuttled to Dudley's leg, hiding behind him and peeking out timidly. The professors, Filch, and the gathered students stared in stunned silence. A mandrake grown to a human shape, lively, not writhing in a pot of soil, and clutching at Dudley for comfort, was an unexpected and astonishing thing. Chapter 147, 145. I understand a little cat language, just a little. "A very bold design," Professor Dumbledore said at once, studying the red and white sphere. "A very ingenious structure. It reminds me of an old friend who passed not long ago." A rare shadow of reminiscence crossed Dumbledore's face. Completely different from his usual style, but I'd like to introduce you to if I have the chance. He would have liked you." "Just a small trick, not worth mentioning," Dudley said with mock modesty. Snape lifted his chin slightly at the compliment, as if Dudley had been taught by him, which on some level wasn't entirely untrue. Dumbledore's gaze then fell on the healthy mandrake sitting nearby. "Perhaps I have another little friend who would like you as well. I'll introduce you when the opportunity arises." Magical creatures and magical plants were never far apart. "It would be an honor, Professor Dumbledore," Dudley replied. With the mandrake, brewing the potion to reverse petrification was not particularly difficult, and it was prepared quickly. 2 drops softened Madame Norris's fur that had been as hard as stone. A few more, and her whole body warmed and loosened. "Although it still falls a bit short of my own method, it's a remarkable result," Lockhart proclaimed shamelessly, though no one present, Filch included, paid his words any mind. "With the petrification reversed, then, what creature did this to Madame Norris? Something like that roaming Hogwarts is not safe," Dumbledore said, the helplessness in his voice betraying how seriously he took his promise that Hogwarts would be the safest place. "It must have been a Medusa," Lockhart announced confidently. "I once encountered a Medusa while adventuring in Armenia. It was there I subdued a werewolf, mentioned in my book, Wandering with Werewolves. If I hadn't been quick, even with only professors present, Lockhart couldn't resist promoting himself. He wasn't entirely wrong. Some magical creatures can petrify. But Medusae are native to Greece, not England, and there was no obvious reason for one to appear in the Forbidden Forest, let alone inside Hogwarts. If not a Medusa, then what? They were troubled. No one could be sure. The only creature who might have seen the attacker up close was Madame Norris herself. She saw a giant snake," Dudley said suddenly as he examined the freshly freed cat. "What?" The word stopped everyone, Lockhart included. Dudley fed a piece of dried fish to Madame Norris, who accepted it eagerly now that she'd regained her strength. "She said she saw a giant snake, very, very large, almost filling the whole corridor," Dudley repeated, emphasizing the size. "You mean you understand cat language?" Professor Flitwick asked. He didn't think Dudley was lying. The question was more out of habit than suspicion. "I did say it before," Dudley replied. He pinched his thumb and forefinger together to indicate a small amount. "I understand a little, just enough to know what Madame Norris was trying to tell us." "That's remarkable," Dumbledore said. "Although compared to you, Professor, don't you also know merpeople and goblin tongues?" he added, with a hint of amusement. In truth, Dumbledore not only knew merpeople and goblin languages, but could understand Parseltongue as well, even if he could not speak it. "Snakehead," Lockhart seized the phrase. "See? I told you, Medusa." "Medusae have many small snakes on their heads," Dudley countered. Madame Norris said the serpent she saw was bigger than the corridor. "1,000-year-old basilisk," Lockhart scoffed. "How could there be such a creature here?" "Don't joke," Filch burst out, uncharacteristically agitated. "Madame Norris is clever. She doesn't lie, and she doesn't make mistakes." Filch's voice trembled with the protective fierceness he always reserved for his cat, his only companion. Dumbledore ignored Lockhart and turned his full attention to Dudley, the other professors following his lead. Under their scrutiny, Dudley spoke slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "There aren't many snake-like magical creatures," he said, "and even fewer that can petrify. The obvious answer is a basilisk," he finished. "Preposterous," Lockhart protested. "Basilisks are rarer than Medusae. Besides, a basilisk's direct gaze kills. Madame Norris was only petrified." "Perhaps Madame Norris didn't see the basilisk directly," Dudley suggested calmly. "Maybe she saw its reflection, through a puddle, a window, something like that. Indirect sight would petrify without killing." Madame Norris meowed and rubbed against Dudley as if in emphatic agreement. The professors exchanged troubled looks. Both Medusa and basilisk seemed unlikely in their setting, but the evidence, Madame Norris's testimony, the petrification, could not be ignored. Hogwarts was supposed to be the safest place in the world, yet threats had found their way in before. Didn't a few trolls make it inside last year? Chapter 148, 146. A Valentine's Day every month. "Professors, have you ever heard the old rumor?" Dudley began slowly. "When Slytherin left Hogwarts, he hid a chamber of secrets where he stored his greatest treasures and all his knowledge, waiting for his heir to open it and purge those unworthy. Lockhart gaped and stumbled over his words for a long time before managing, "He's a dark wizard. He brought Medusa." Who would bring Medusa to Hogwarts? To host a birthday party? To petrify a cat? And what did that have to do with a Chamber of Secrets? "Professor Dumbledore," Dudley continued, "as far as I know, the chamber was opened 50 years ago, and a young witch paid for it with her life. The ministry found and expelled the self-confessed culprit," Dudley went on, "but I don't believe that was the whole truth." Dudley's words hung in the air. Lockhart fell silent, visibly calculating whether it was time to hand in his resignation. Someone had already died 50 years ago. Who could say who might be next? He had a promising future and far too many galleons at stake to stay where danger might strike. Still, leaving felt bittersweet. He already pictured how his next book, Me in Hogwarts, would eclipse his rivals. A basilisk, creature unseen for over 400 years, would certainly make for a bestseller. "I think this should be handled by the disciplinary group," Dudley began, but Dumbledore interrupted gently. "Dudley, this is a matter for the professors. You are still too young." Dudley bowed his head a fraction, refusing to argue. "This is only our second year," he said. "Seems Hogwarts isn't very safe." Dumbledore said nothing more, but there was a quiet calculation in his face. At heart, Dudley knew Dumbledore trusted the staff to do their work. Once they identified the threat, it would be easier to contain. The basilisk was vulnerable to the crowing of roosters, and Hagrid kept several on the grounds. "Professor Dumbledore," Dudley added, "do you remember what you promised me?" Dumbledore looked at him and gave a small, reassuring nod. "Try to trust the professors," he advised. "All right," Dudley agreed. He had the sense to hold back from investigating further. Instead, he had specially made a wizard card for each member of his disciplinary group and instructed them to keep it on their person. The cards couldn't withstand a basilisk's direct killing stare, but they could act as mirrors, reflecting the fatal effect and reducing it to petrification. With that precaution, the eerie voice that had announced the chamber's opening seemed to vanish as if it had never existed. The patrols the professors formed turned up nothing. No trace of a giant serpent. Still, their vigilance wasn't wasted. Students sneaking out at night dropped to a historic low. Dudley himself had tried a less subtle plan. He sent his domesticated Cornish pixies out from the second-floor girls' lavatory to search for signs of the basilisk. Letting such a dangerous thing roam unchallenged through Hogwarts was not his style. If someone unlucky encountered it, petrification might be the mildest outcome. But even the pixies found no trail. When Dudley wanted to press the search further, Dumbledore stopped him. "Trust the professors," the headmaster said, and Dudley relented. Days slipped by. The initial alarm faded as students returned to classes and gossip moved on. Attention spans were limited, and once the excitement ebbed, everyone forgot, until February 14th. Valentine's Day, of course, which could be multiplied into White Valentine's Day, Black Valentine's Day, Rose Valentine's Day, Green Valentine's Day, if one wished. This year, when the students filed into the Great Hall, it looked less like a school dining room and more like a confectioner's fever dream. The walls were carpeted with oversized pink blooms, heart-shaped confetti floated from a pale blue ceiling, and a cloying sweetness hung in the air. The entire hall was drenched in pink. "What happened? Did a pink demon attack Hogwarts?" Ron demanded, pointing at the garish decorations. "I think someone has gone mad," Dudley muttered, fixing his glare on Lockhart. The professor at the high table wore an outrageously pink robe and was beaming as if the scene were his greatest triumph. The other professors sat beside him with sober faces, doing their best to conceal any expression that might suggest approval. Not everyone could pull off pink. Lockhart certainly could not. "Happy Valentine's Day, everyone!" Lockhart boomed. "So far, 59 people have sent me cards. 59! I arranged this little surprise for you all." 59? Hermione murmured and jotted the number down, frowning. The detail pricked at her mind like a splinter. It was a clue she didn't like. "I have a bad feeling about this," Harry said, looking at Lockhart on the stage. "No, Harry," Ron echoed. "I have the same feeling." Neville added, "Me too." Malfoy chose the moment to smirk and say nothing. "I hope my premonition doesn't come true," Dudley said under his breath. They had barely finished the thought when the premonition came true. Chapter 149, 147. This behavior severely disrupted school discipline. Lockhart clapped his hands, and 12 sullen-faced little dwarves, their most noticeable feature being large, red, bulbous noses, marched in from the doors leading to the entrance hall. Unlike ordinary dwarves, each wore tiny golden wings and carried a harp. "My friendly little cupids," Lockhart announced, as pleased as if he were unveiling a surprise. "They'll be wandering the school today, delivering Valentine's cards to all of you." "The fun doesn't stop there," he went on, grinning. "Why not ask Professor Snape to teach you how to brew a love potion? I'm sure he's very good at it. As far as I know, the love flowers Professor Sprout planted are about to bloom. We must give them to our loved ones before they wither. It will bring the blessing of love. You could also ask Professor Trelawney to divine your destined other half if her divinations prove accurate. Professor Flitwick is even more skilled at enchantments than any wizard I've ever known. Look at that clever old dog." With every name he dropped, the professor in question visibly darkened. By the time Lockhart finished, even McGonagall, the only one he hadn't mentioned until the end, had a face so stern it was nearly black. Whatever answers the students sought from the staff, it was clear they would not come tonight. Instead, the little winged dwarves remained loyal to their appointed task. They would deliver the love letters and, if they felt like it, read them out loud in public. "What a public shaming," Harry muttered, watching as a young wizard struggled to get away. The dwarves closed in and began to read the letter aloud. The boy went utterly limp with resignation. "I wonder who the second unlucky person will be," Harry said. "I see him! It's him! Harry Potter!" one of the dwarves shouted, pointing so loudly that the whole great hall looked toward them. Harry stiffened. Could it really be addressed to him? He braced himself, just in case. Malfoy was quicker than everyone else to seize the moment. "Potter, I didn't know you were so popular," he mocked, smirking. Then, when a dwarf announced they had letters for him as well, Malfoy's bravado froze. He went as rigid as if hit by a Trificus totalis. The idea of having a love letter read out in front of everyone visibly unnerved him, his already pale lips drained of color. The dwarves moved on. "And Longbottom. Oh, there are 5 of them." Their attention fell on Neville, who watched in bewilderment, until he remembered the dueling club night when he'd unexpectedly bested Lockhart and won a few admirers. Ron, standing by Neville, cleared his throat and straightened his collar as if ready for anything. A dwarf shoved him roughly aside with a sniff. "Get out of the way, redhead," it said. Ron blinked, offended and confused. "Where's mine?" he thought. Then a cluster of dwarves pointed and screamed. "Dursley! Look, it's Dursley! I found him! 80 letters!" They had nearly finished half their list in one go. Dudley looked around, affronted. The disciplinary group he led had received a surprising number of letters. Hermione, curious, poked Dudley and smiled as she asked to see them. A quill in her hand snapped with a small sound, not because of anything magical, just bad luck. Still, 80 love letters was more than even Lockhart had. But he wasn't the most popular. The highest count, they said, was 108, belonging to a first-year Ravenclaw named Madison. Cedric had quite a few too, making him the most popular male among those present after Dudley and Lockhart, though Cedric wasn't in the Great Hall that night. The dwarves wanted Dudley to submit to their reading, as they had the others. Dudley bristled. "Your actions have severely disrupted school discipline," he said coldly. "One of the responsibilities of the disciplinary group is to rectify the school's conduct." The dwarves took that as a challenge. "Hey, big guy, you want to fight? There are 20 of us," one of them boasted, flexing, as if size and numbers would intimidate him. Dudley only smiled. With a light snap of his fingers, a blue whirlwind swirled into being, and a large, chattering swarm of Cornish pixies appeared, tumbling into view. "Looks like I've got a lot of backup, too," he said. "Get them out," he ordered, pointing at the dwarves. The pixies launched themselves forward. Though not as individually powerful as Peeves, in a group, they were a ferociously disruptive force. The little cupids were no match. They screamed and cursed, were swatted and tossed, and one by one they were driven from the Great Hall and finally out of the castle. The Valentine's Day spectacle fizzled out almost as soon as it had begun. Some of the girls looked disappointed for a moment, but most students breathed a sigh of relief. Lockhart watched and did nothing. He recognized those Cornish pixies. Apparently, they were the same troublemakers he'd brought over before. He chose not to interfere. Amid the scattering commotion, a pair of eyes in the crowd watched the disciplinary group with particular hatred, or rather, watched Hermione Granger with hatred. Not long after the Valentine's chaos subsided, the thing everyone had feared finally happened. When the professor's patrols began to relax, thinking no more trouble would follow, another incident struck. This time, it wasn't a cat that had been attacked, but a student, and a ghost had been attacked with him. Fortunately, neither had been killed, but both were lying rigid and unmoving, petrified by a full-body bind curse. A small line of words, written in chicken blood, scarred the wall near where they were found. This time, the message was pointed, cruel, and specific. "Next is you, you filthy mudblood," it read. "Hermione Granger." Chapter 150, 148. Do not try to oppose Mr. Dursley. Father Slytherin common room. A strange little society had gathered. The Dursley Fan Club. Pansy Parkinson stood at the front like a drill sergeant, pointer in hand, tapping a blackboard. Her finger traced and retraced the name she'd written there. Mr. Dursley. "The Chamber of Secrets. It's impossible that Mr. Dursley opened it," she declared. Around her, the members fanned out in uneven ranks. Some were Slytherins who idolized Dudley Dursley. Some admired Hermione Granger. A few shipped the two of them together. It was an odd mix, but Pansy kept her eye on the prize. "So who's challenging our king?" she demanded, circling the name again. Daphne Greengrass, second in command, rose on a huff and sneered. "And they even targeted Miss Granger." Pansy paced, sweeping glances over the assembled students. It seemed likely someone here, someone from Slytherin, might have opened the chamber. "Everyone," she said finally, "I'll give you one chance. If any of you open the chamber, step forward now." She waited. Nobody did. Good. That's a relief. Pansy let herself relax for a fraction of a second, but anger flared up just as quickly. How dare someone from another house sully Slytherin's name? And if it really was one of them, well, they'd deal with them too. If this turns out to be a lie, I will make whoever deceived all of Slytherin understand the consequences. The crowd hissed in agreement. "Challenging Mr. Dursley is challenging us, Slytherin," someone shouted. Plans were made in the heat of the moment, an investigation during the holidays. Slytherins might not face many physical threats at school, but they had connections, children of the most powerful families in the wizarding world. They would find the culprit. At Malfoy Manor, on the rare holiday when Draco had returned home, the house was, as always, opulent. White peacocks strolled the gardens, fairies tended tulip beds, the fountain threw rainbows into the sunlight, and the lake glittered like a sheet of crushed glass. Draco came back dusty from somewhere, but the first thing he did was seek his father out. He found Lucius in the drawing room, cane in hand, staring idly at the fire. "Father, are you behind what's happening at Hogwarts?" Draco asked bluntly. He was sure of it. There was no way the attacks weren't connected to Lucius in some way. He just couldn't work out the motive. Lucius didn't answer directly. He smiled thinly and pretended indifference as he toyed with his cane. "Draco, how can you use such vulgar words?" he said, smoothing his tone. "Confess to Mr. Dursley if you're involved," Draco pressed. "If it's you, own it. If it isn't, let it end." Narcissa, who had been listening in from a nearby armchair, frowned. Her voice was cool and sharp even at home. "Do not speak to your father like that. Where are your manners? Where is your composure? You were never like this before." She always kept herself composed, even when worried. "Mother," Draco replied, equally cold, "I think father has gone too far." Lucius's patience thinned. "Draco, how many times do I have to tell you I'm not that bored?" he snapped. Draco pressed on regardless. "A third year has already been attacked. We don't know his condition yet." Narcissa startled. For all her composure, she was a mother first. "Draco, are you all right? Are you sure? Hogwarts isn't supposed to be like this." "It's a Hufflepuff who's been petrified," Draco said. The word hung in the air between them. Right now, it's only petrification. Next time, it could be death. At that, Lucius's expression betrayed him for a flicker. Something like satisfaction, quickly smoothed away. Draco saw it and knew in his bones his father was entangled in whatever was happening at Hogwarts. Narcissa tightened, searching his face for confirmation. Lucius, are you sure this is unrelated to you? Don't forget Draco is at that school. I said we should have sent Draco to Durmstrang, Lucius muttered, not quite meeting her eyes. Narcissa visibly changed when family was involved. Draco will be fine, she told herself more than anyone, but she wasn't convinced. Lucius rose, finishing his composure with a practiced smile. I'll handle this. You needn't worry. He slipped on his coat and headed for the door. It's almost night, Narcissa said, alarm edging into her voice. Are you going out now? Ministry business, Lucius lied smoothly. Something I remembered at the last minute. I'll be back soon. Draco watched his father head out through the grand archway. He wanted to shout for Lucius to confess if he was responsible, to spare Draco the fallout if it was his doing. He wanted to tell him not to tangle with Mr. Dursley. Father, Draco called after him as he moved toward the gate. If you did this, confess. If you didn't, do nothing more. Lucius paused on the threshold, not turning. Draco pushed on, voice sharper now. Do not try to oppose Mr. Dursley. Only you will suffer for it. By the time the words left his mouth, Lucius had already stepped out through the tall gates of Malfoy Manor. Whether or not he heard them, Draco wasn't sure. Inside, Narcissa's hand tightened on the arm of her chair, and a chill crept over the house like the shadow of something that had already been set in motion. Chapter 151, 149. Alluring and delicate, but I'm not interested in flats Hogwarts, inside the library. I was originally going to take that path that day, but I changed my route at the last minute, Hermione said. So it's obvious. The attacker was targeting you from the start. Dudley spoke quietly as they reviewed the incident in which a young wizard had been petrified. This time, Dudley hadn't used a mandrake right away. He'd decided to wait for Professor Sprout's mandrakes to mature. He was convinced Hermione had been the intended target and the petrified boy was collateral damage. If he cured the boy now, the witness would tell everyone what he'd seen and alert whoever was behind it. If Dudley wanted to catch the mastermind once and for all, patience was the better plan. As long as the boy remained petrified, the culprit would think the coast was clear, and such an attack would likely come again. Hermione, try to stay in the Gryffindor common room for now. I'll handle this, Dudley said. Are you sure? Hermione asked. She was more worried about Dudley than herself. Facing something that could petrify people was no small matter. Of course, Dudley sounded confident. He already had a rough idea. If the attacker hadn't mentioned the Chamber of Secrets, he might have been completely lost, but the mention of a basilisk in the chamber pointed toward the Slytherin heir. And as far as Dudley knew, only one person was claiming to be the heir of Slytherin right now. Tom, an upperclassman almost 50 years older than him. The diary had been destroyed, reduced to a pile of black residue. Its magic had been drained and crystallized. Its soul seemed folded into something else. It looked as dead as something could be. But that didn't mean Tom had disappeared. If not the diary, then what else might he have hidden? To test his suspicion, Dudley went alone to the 8th floor, the top of Hogwarts Castle, closest to the Ravenclaw common room. He stopped in front of a tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy teaching trolls to ballet dance, closed his eyes, and concentrated on needing a place to hide things. After a moment, a smooth stretch of wall shifted and a hidden door appeared. Dudley touched it and pushed it open. This was the Room of Requirement, one of Hogwarts' most mysterious places. It came and went only when someone truly needed it. If you knew to focus, you could find it. Behind the door stretched a vast interior, larger than the Great Hall, obviously under an undetectable extension charm. It was crammed with all manner of things students over the centuries had left there. Torn skirts, legless tables, love letters stained with unknown substances, half-eaten breakfasts. Most worrying were the dark arts items. If the contents of this room were organized, it could rival a shop in Nocturne Alley, more complete than Borgin and Burke's. Dudley activated his Eye of Data and watched the room translate into a stream of information. He was here for one thing, Tom's other Horcrux, the lost diadem of Ravenclaw. The chamber teemed with strange artifacts, but the diadem was not among them. The absence could mean it had never been here, or that someone had already taken it. I should have come sooner, Dudley murmured, but he didn't regret his choice. Even if he had to do it again, he would wait. The lawn outside the castle would be better for training, and his next step was to investigate Ravenclaw. It was the closest likely place. The door to the room of requirement opened behind him. "You really are here," a slightly lazy, sweet voice said. A striking head of golden hair appeared in the doorway. Madison leaned against the frame in a pink pajama top, printed with tiny strawberries, her neckline loose enough to show the pale skin of her throat. She smelled different from the cheap love potion Dudley remembered. Clean and natural, pleasant in a way he'd grown used to from Hermione's soap scent after years of acquaintance. "It's you," Dudley said without surprise. Madison had already been on his list of suspects. "I've been waiting for you," she said softly, closing the door and gliding toward him. A faint fragrance trailed her like a promise. She bit her lower lip with her upper teeth and looked up at Dudley, one eyebrow arching. Her eyes were silk, and the whole expression combined purity and desire, like a lotus emerging from mist but radiating intent. She stretched out her arms, as if about to take his right hand into hers. Dudley sidestepped smoothly. "I'm not interested in dainty types," he said flatly. The petted seduction dissolved in an instant. Dudley made a small adjustment to the room's settings, redirecting it to be nearer Ravenclaw. Although Gryffindor's tower was also on the 8th floor, one common room sat to the east and the other to the west. The room of requirement could shift its access accordingly. Chapter 152-150, Lord Voldemort suffered from a lack of culture. "Damn it, isn't Granger the same?" Madison snapped, furious. She couldn't fathom why this boy showed no interest in her at all. Even worse, she couldn't stand losing to a plain-looking, flat-chested little witch who barely noticed her. Dudley, however, wouldn't tell her that he preferred buck teeth and a slight tan. "She hasn't hit puberty yet," Dudley said casually. There was a touch of pride in his tone, and Madison bristled. "I haven't either," she retorted, forcing her chest out, though her simple, smooth pajamas gave the gesture no dignity. Madison's anger flared. Dudley was maddening. Why couldn't he fall for her like other young wizards did? "You took it, didn't you?" she demanded. Dudley pointed to an empty shelf in the room of requirement, the most prominent shelf in the room, where something ought to have been displayed. Professor Tom was odd. He feared death, yet hid his Horcruxes in such obvious places. A Ravenclaw diadem, a Slytherin locket, things that could be found without much imagination. If Dudley had been him, he'd have chosen a plain roadside pebble for the first Horcrux and thrown it into a river. Finding it would take years. As for the second, Tom Riddle's first death was in 1981. Voyager 2 launched in 1977. If Tom had hidden a Horcrux on Voyager 2, by now it would be outside the solar system. True immortality, if he didn't lack imagination. Apparently, Professor Tom suffered from a lack of culture. Besides, if he'd been clever enough to try that, maybe the Potter saga wouldn't have ended in 7 books. Perhaps we'd have had an 8th, Harry Potter and the Star Trek fan. "I threw it away," Madison said sourly, sinking down in a random spot in the room of requirement. A dark arts thing with its own consciousness and no sensible head to find. Only a fool would believe it. It had come up with awful ideas, too. I asked it how to capture a wizard, and it kept trying to trick me into giving it my body. You'd have to be a cross between a brainless troll and a stupid goblin to buy that. "You're very smart," Dudley said approvingly for once. "If you see it again, tell me." It seemed Professor Tom's condition had even left his Horcrux half-witted. Dudley winked at Madison, an unspoken, "Why haven't you left yet?" Madison burned with rage, but knew she couldn't just thump Dudley. She'd be the one who came off worse. Her eyes darted, and then she thought of something. "I remember. A little witch picked it up. I can't quite." "You mean Audrina, don't you?" Dudley cut in. Madison blinked. "How did you know?" "You told me," Dudley shrugged, "a second ago." There were only a few people who bore a grudge against Hermione, and even fewer who hated her enough for Madison's tone to reveal it. "Thanks for the tip." Dudley pushed the room of requirement door open and looked back at Madison. "I won't disturb you any longer." He had barely stepped outside when he turned his head again. "By the way, strawberries look better on a white background. Pink doesn't suit you." Pink was one of the hardest colors to pull off. Too much of it could be oppressive, especially in a room of requirement that was all pink. With a clang, the door shut, leaving Madison alone. So that was it. He just wasn't interested. If he'd been sharper, he could have had her in bed 7 nights running. Of course, an academic like Hermione suited him better. Bastard! Madison shouted at the closed door, no longer pretending to be ladylike. Her anger surged so hot that her fingers clenched and she slammed a table leg, her fair, delicate hand momentarily taking on the talon-like appearance of an eagle's claw. It was said that when Avila grew extremely angry, she took on a monstrous, beaked form and even breathed fire. Madison wasn't full Vila, but the transformation still left marks. "I'll pin you down, I swear." With no one else present, she cursed at full volume. Dudley, now that he knew who had the Horcrux, wasn't in a hurry. It was night. Any action would have to wait until morning. Breaking into the Ravenclaw girls' dormitory at night, even as head of the disciplinary group, required nerve he didn't have. Besides, he had just received an important piece of information from a house elf. Dudley took up his quill, wrote a letter through the night, and sent it with Hedwig. The next morning, something big happened at Hogwarts. Early, a group of adult wizards barged into the Great Hall, startling the students who were still finishing breakfast. The obvious leader was Lucius Malfoy, Draco's father, whose presence made Draco look both displeased and resigned. Among them was also Cornelius Fudge. "I know him," Ron whispered, the words barely audible as he stared at the short, stout, oddly dressed, middle-aged man at the high table. "My father's boss." "Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic," someone hissed, then lowered their voice even more, so only those nearby could hear. "An idiot." "Lucius, Cornelius, what brings you here?" Dumbledore asked calmly, though his tone carried an edge of concealed anger. Their arrival had unnerved the students. "Dumbledore, we heard there was a terrifying attack at Hogwarts. Is that true?" Chapter 153, 151. Lucius's forced abdication. "Something has indeed happened, Cornelius. Then I am very sorry, Dumbledore." Fudge's apology sounded practiced. His expression was stilted. "In that case, the Ministry of Magic must take some necessary measures. We have already informed the school board." Dumbledore's brows tightened. He had no knowledge of the school board's involvement. Someone was clearly acting behind his back, by coercion, flattery, or some other means. And who that person might be hardly needed saying. "Dumbledore, these are the Auror office's finest," Fudge continued, gesturing to the wizards who had accompanied him. "I trust they'll help Hogwarts deal with dangerous situations." Aurors, in theory, were the enforcement arm of the wizarding world, elite fighters against dark wizards and dark arts. In practice, elite often required quotation marks, but Aurors were undeniably capable. Dumbledore's reply was measured. "I believe Hogwarts can handle this itself." A flash of anger crossed his sky-blue eyes. The ministry's reach had grown too long this time. School board, minister, Aurors, everything was conspiring toward one aim: forced abdication. Decades ago, anyone who attempted to force Dumbledore out would have regretted it. The title of the greatest white wizard was no idle honor. Perhaps he was older now, more cautious, less disposed to conflict, so he seemed easier to bully. But that did not mean he would yield lightly. "Professor, it's bad! Audrina is missing!" A small witch burst into the room, panic in her voice as she hurried toward the professor's table. Heads turned. At the cry, Lucius Malfoy's smile widened until it nearly became a laugh. "Oh, Dumbledore," he said smoothly, "it seems Hogwarts cannot handle this. Not only has a student been attacked, but another is missing. Life or death unknown," he added, stress on the last words. Though his tone was formally respectful, his face and manner betrayed no reverence. "This is just an accident," Professor McGonagall snapped, unable to conceal her outrage. Beside her, everyone but Snape, who wore an unreadable smile, glowered at Lucius. "The situation is grave," Lucius interrupted lazily, unrolling a long sheet of parchment. "The board believes you should step down. This is the dismissal order, signed by all 12 members." "We think you have not been using your talents properly," Lucius read, his voice smooth. "Since you have been unable to stop the terrible events at Hogwarts, we should replace you with someone who can. For example, the Dean of Slytherin would be quite suitable." He tapped the parchment insolently. "I am a concerned father. My child is a student at Hogwarts, and I expect the headmaster to be truly caring and responsible." "Mr. Lucius, wait, this isn't what we agreed." Fudge's objection came out as nearly a shout, shock and panic on his face. The Aurors were only meant to assist with the investigation. Dumbledore was to cooperate, not to be dismissed. Dismiss Dumbledore? No, no, this is absolutely not what we want, especially with so many children present. Fudge's protests were not born of loyalty. He did not want to be remembered as the minister who dismissed the school's beloved headmaster. Even a controversial head like Phineas Nigellus Black had never been removed by the ministry. That precedent mattered. Moreover, if Lucius forced Dumbledore out, who would be blamed if things went wrong? Fudge was well aware of that political hazard. Lucius seemed not to care what Fudge thought. He had never taken the minister seriously. Holding the parchment, he stepped close enough to be almost level with Dumbledore. Lucius, you have no right to dismiss Dumbledore. McGonagall stepped forward, fury in her voice. Dumbledore was appointed by Hogwarts. I believe I do, Professor McGonagall. Lucius waved the signed document. With 12 school board signatures, the dismissal carried official weight and legal standing in the wizarding world. Practically speaking, Dumbledore might continue to exercise the powers of headmaster, but he would be nominally dismissed unless he chose to publicly repudiate the board's joint decision. Undoubtedly, Dumbledore would hesitate. To refuse the legitimacy of the school board was to deny the authority of the ministry that empowered it. That was a line few would cross. That idea clearly pleased Lucius. If the Aurors could resolve the crisis, Dumbledore's prestige would be diminished. If the Aurors failed, blame would fall on the student responsible, possibly, in Lucius's calculations, the Weasley girl he had set up. He had left a book with her. Concealing dark arts items was a serious accusation. By framing Ginny Weasley, Lucius could strike at an old rival and solve two problems at once. He smiled inwardly at the thought. Around him, the classroom crackled with shock and outrage, while Lucius Malfoy held his parchment like a dagger. Chapter 154, 152. Visitors from the Ministry of Magic? Disband the disciplinary group? Esteemed Headmaster Dumbledore, I believe you will need to come with us. Lucius Malfoy had taken over the role of spokesman for the ministry as if he were the minister himself. You sheltered the murderer who opened the Chamber of Secrets and killed a student 50 years ago. As far as I know, that man is still keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Letting such a dangerous person remain here is unconscionable. After what's happened again, you should give a full explanation. Of course, not to me, Lucius added grandly, but to the parents of the other students. Lucius spoke as if upholding justice. Dumbledore, is what Mr. Malfoy says true? At that, Fudge's face changed. He may have been a bit foolish, but even he reacted now. How could you keep such a dangerous man at Hogwarts? This endangers the lives of our children. Fudge wasn't asking because he'd known Hagrid was on the grounds. He'd never really paid attention to such things. He asked because this scandal could hurt his popularity. He still wanted to remain minister. Dumbledore, calm as ever, answered lightly, his blue eyes steady on Lucius's cold gray ones. Hagrid was innocent of what happened back then. Whether he is innocent is not for you to decide, Lucius snapped. The ministry convicted him at the time. That single fact was all he needed. Even if the ministry had been wrong, they would never admit it. Admitting error would undermine their prestige. For now, you will come with us to the Wizengamot, and your keeper of keys and grounds as well. Having achieved his first aim, Lucius allowed himself a small, satisfied glance toward the Slytherin table. His eyes lingered on Draco for a fraction of a second. Privately, he thought, see, this is your father's influence. Even the greatest of wizards must ultimately be answerable to me. Listen to me, children. Lucius turned to face the students, lifting his voice. From this moment, Dumbledore is no longer your headmaster. It is too dangerous here. You must follow our orders, obey the ministry, and cooperate with these Aurors. Minister, surely it's no problem to leave the situation in the hands of the ministry Aurors? Lucius asked, as if only now remembering Fudge and putting the question to him. If the ministry's Aurors couldn't handle things, then it wouldn't be Lucius's concern. No problem, of course no problem, Fudge managed, wiping sweat from his brow. He couldn't very well refuse in front of all Hogwarts. The students erupted into whispers and nervous murmurs. Several began summoning owls to write home. Lucius cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. Of course, he continued. Now that the headmaster has been removed, some matters should be explained to you. Draco's eyes went wide and cold at once. Dread tightened in his chest. His father would he? I hear that some people, by certain methods or with some bewitching draught, persuaded the former headmaster to agree to the formation of an illegal organization. Lucius emphasized the words former and illegal with relish, hinting darkly. Everyone here should know. What was it called? Ah, yes. He pretended to search his memory, then smiled as if remembering. The disciplinary group. I hear several students were expelled because of it. Expelling students without informing the school board. How irresponsible. I only learned of this through other channels. He told the story piece by piece, adopting an offhand tone that made his accusations sound casual and inevitable. I also hear they have no respect for professors. One of our own was even attacked publicly not long ago. This is simply intolerable. Lucius exaggerated and twisted the facts, glancing briefly at Lockhart, then letting his gaze fall on Neville as if to underline the point. Minister Fudge, what do you think? Fudge faltered. He'd been trying to figure out how to avoid responsibility once Dumbledore was out of the way, but Lucius's sudden shift left him flummoxed. What disciplinary group? He'd never heard of such a thing. Lucius, not surprised by the weak reply, sneered inwardly and then spoke with even greater effect. Minister Fudge, I've been told this organization served directly under the former headmaster Dumbledore. Fudge had no idea what the disciplinary group was, but he did catch 3 key words: organization, serving, Dumbledore. Is that true? Is what Mr. Malfoy says true? He demanded, suddenly agitated. Dumbledore, you never told me this. When Cornelius Fudge first became minister, he had leaned heavily on Dumbledore to stabilize his tenure. At that time, Dumbledore's prestige was unmatched. He had defeated Grindelwald and stood against Voldemort. And if Dumbledore had wanted, he could have taken the ministry. Fudge had been careful in everything, always consulting Dumbledore. He had once been called the headmaster's echo. Only after the Order of the Phoenix disbanded, and it became clear Dumbledore did not want the ministry, did Fudge relax. But the thought that Dumbledore might be running yet another organization put a fresh personal fear in him. The phrase directly serves Dumbledore set his nerves on edge. Cornelius, I don't think I need to tell you everything, Dumbledore said, his tone threaded with weary exasperation. This minister took everything involving himself as a personal slight or a threat. Lucius's face split into a triumphant smile. He'd swayed the minister with a few well-placed words. I believe such an illegal organization should be banned, Lucius announced, bearing his intent at last. From now on, there will be no disciplinary group at Hogwarts. The game of playing house must be brought to an end. Chapter 155, Giving Lucius a Shock. After Lucius finished speaking, he looked again toward the Slytherin table at his son Draco. Draco, do you see? This is the charm of power, he said. Your disciplinary group is nothing compared to me. As for Mr. Dursley, I could have it disbanded with a single trick. What Lucius did not expect was that his words were a fuse that ignited a powder keg, provoking a reaction far stronger than when Dumbledore was dismissed. The Great Hall fell into an eerie silence. From Gryffindor and Hufflepuff to Ravenclaw and Slytherin, the students all went still, staring at Lucius in stunned disbelief. The disciplinary group's reputation, its academic authority and influence, was now deeply ingrained in everyone's mind. It was the strongest body at Hogwarts. Father, you've done something foolish, very foolish, Draco said, rubbing his temples, at a loss for how else to express his alarm. I told you this morning. Why didn't you listen? Why would you go against the disciplinary group? He looked around at the Slytherins and saw their gazes turning cold. He realized it was too late. Dudley's face showed no expression. It was too late. Slytherin, rise. With a roar of a single shout, the Slytherins at their table, older and younger alike, stood as one. Every eye in the house turned to Lucius. He stood bewildered. What was Slytherin doing? Fudge was equally at a loss. What exactly is this disciplinary group? He wondered. Why haven't I been told about this? What else has Lucius kept from me? He felt the sting of being manipulated and was furious at the thought, but he hid it well, perhaps because no one had really taken him seriously to begin with. If Dumbledore had wanted the ministry, he could have pursued it long ago. Fudge was relieved he had not joined Lucius's outburst. Otherwise, he might have angered something he couldn't afford to provoke. Uncle Lucius, a sixth-year Slytherin, spoke first. He was the Bostwick heir, the only legitimate, compliant successor of the Bostwick family. His older cousins had followed Voldemort, become Death Eaters, and were now in Azkaban and stripped of inheritance. He had done business with Lucius's family before. Looking at Lucius with an earnest, solemn expression, he said carefully, "Please retract what you just said." Lucius stared, baffled. The heir of the Bostwicks had the gall to speak to a Malfoy like that? He thought of the respect his own house commanded. Before he could collect himself, another voice joined in. "Retract what you just said, Uncle Lucius." The eldest son of the Yaxleys, future patriarch of a powerful family and one of the few who could stand equal to a Malfoy, repeated. Pansy Parkinson, the Parkinsons' little princess, stepped forward as well. One by one, other Slytherins spoke the same words. More followed until the entire table was calling out in unison, "Retract what you just said." Their voices blended into a single, synchronized shout that set the great hall humming. The sight stunned students from the other houses and sent a chill through the assembled adults. When had Slytherin ever been so united? Lucius tried to think it through. Hufflepuff was usually the most tightly knit, an outsider's view of solidarity among the weak. Gryffindor and Slytherin only banded together in specific circumstances. Ravenclaw was famously scatterbrained. He had seen Slytherin united before, but never like this. How could a mere Dursley, a wizard from a Muggle family, even a mudblood, be so adored by Slytherin? Lucius could only conclude that there must be enormous benefits involved, or that something like the One had appeared again. He remembered Draco's warning, "Never provoke Mr. Dursley." Could it be? He shook his head, dismissing the thought as impossible. A wizard from a Muggle family could not compare to the One. Lucius, proud of his pure-blood status, did not know that the master who preached pure-blood supremacy was himself only half-blood and the unfortunate product of an amortentia, an irony he never suspected. Fudge and the Aurors were stunned, too. None of them could recall Slytherin being so utterly unified when they had been students. Perhaps this Dursley was descended from some great house, only noble dynasties inspired such devotion. Fudge was quietly relieved he hadn't echoed Lucius's boast. Had he done so, he might have provoked an unstoppable force and watched his already low approval ratings collapse further. At the center of it all, Dudley Dursley picked up a napkin and calmly wiped his mouth. He was the only person still eating in the Great Hall, nonchalantly stuffing lamb chops and chicken legs into his mouth with a practiced elegance. He was perhaps 60% full. He lifted a hand slightly, and the Slytherins fell silent at once. The Great Hall hushed. One by one, the Slytherin students stared at the back of Dudley's head with rapt attention. Their looks were heavy with respect, admiration, obsession, even fanaticism. Those countless unnameable gazes intertwined and concentrated on him. Dursley, the King of Slytherin. Chapter 156, 154. Lucius, I am the Minister of Magic. Draco's father, Dudley said slowly, his voice calm and unshakable. He did not call him Lucius as the other Slytherins did. He called him by what mattered in that moment, and he did not even stand. He remained seated. The unspoken message was clear. He was dealing with Lucius only because of Draco. I hope you don't bring your social customs into this school. Conspiracy, false accusation, twisting facts. Those are truly despicable. Dudley's gaze seemed to cut through everything. It struck Lucius like a physical force and made his heart flutter. This was the first time they met eye to eye. Lucius had seen him briefly at Flourish and Blots, but then he had been occupied with Mr. Weasley and had only offered a quick look. School is a place of learning, a sacred place, Dudley continued. I don't want it to be contaminated. He looked directly at the professor's table. If any professor feels insulted, if anyone believes they have been disrespected or attacked, they may step forward. Dudley deliberately emphasized the word been. I will give him the chance to prove it. Lockhart tried to shrink back into his chair, pulling his neck in and leaning toward the other professors as if hiding would make him less visible. Attention was dangerous to him. He preferred to shine, not to be tested. Any notion of going up to assert himself vanished as he watched the tension in the room. Calmly, Dudley produced a scrap of parchment identical in quality to the one Lucius held. "I think you should look at this," he said. "It bears the signatures of all 11 members of the school board," Dudley announced, his voice carrying to every corner. "The disciplinary group is legal and sanctioned." Lucius's face drained of color as he stared at the parchment. None of the other 11 board members had informed him of this. He had been excluded. He went from pale to a sickly green, fingers tightening on the edge of his seat. Fudge, standing nearby, wiped his brow in relief. The slow reaction had paid off. Dudley's move had dismantled every corner of Lucius's plan. "You call it child's play?" The whole of Slytherin backed him. "You say he disrespects the professors? Let a professor step forward and prove it. You say the disciplinary group is illegal? Here is official, signed proof, without you, Lucius." Even Snape, who had maintained a courteous rapport with Lucius, looked at him with something like pity. Dudley had the composure and preparedness of someone far beyond his years. He reminded certain people of those they had once admired. The comparison stung Lucius more than any rebuke could have. Dudley tapped the table once, and the Slytherins understood. Someone promptly brought him a cup of black tea and a small plate of biscuits. The girl who placed them in front of him made Lucius narrow his eyes. Daphne Greengrass, eldest daughter of a family proud of its pure-blood lineage, was regarding Dudley with an intensity that bordered on adoration. Dudley sipped his tea, relaxed his shoulders, and allowed the single word, "good," to escape. Dumbledore, who had watched the exchange closely, let the tension leave his face. "Mr. Lucius," he said, voice even, "we should be going. As Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, I must tell you that if we delay any longer, we'll likely have to wait until tomorrow. They finish work far more punctually than many of Hogwarts' staff," he added with a small, mischievous smile. The remark lightened the moment. Lucius, stewing but seeing no path forward, finally emitted a reluctant snort. "Humph, very well, let us go." Before they left, Minister Fudge, whose temper had been tested, reminded the room of his office in a slightly indignant tone. "Mr. Lucius—" "I am the Minister of Magic," Dudley interrupted gently but firmly, cutting through the protest. Even Lucius could not openly affront Fudge. Whatever Fudge's shortcomings, he had held the office for 12 years and carried its authority. Fudge himself, though outwardly blustering, found Dudley's presence disarming. There are some people whose authority is as much aura as title, and Dudley was one of them. The minister fell in line as if by instinct. "Minister Fudge," Dudley continued, looking straight at him, "please escort the Aurors back with you. I believe Hogwarts can handle this matter internally." Fudge and the Aurors hesitated then, as Dumbledore had suggested, prepared to leave. Dudley's tone shifted from negotiation to assurance. "Professor Dumbledore, I'll take care of this before you return. I promise." He met Dumbledore's eyes solemnly. "I won't let anyone else be harmed, except the instigator." Dumbledore's expression softened with relief. The Wizengamot could handle its own business for the time being. Hogwarts would be left in Dudley's capable hands and those of its professors. The old headmaster relaxed completely, a smile creasing his face. He winked at Dudley, voice light. "If you should need anything, my office is open. There are various things there that might help. Fawkes likes the sort of things you make, too. Perhaps you could oblige him." Dudley understood the hint. The headmaster's office held Fawkes, the Sorting Hat, and the Sword of Gryffindor, objects that, except for the hat's more passive role, could be of decisive use against certain dark forces. He simply nodded. The game had been called, and Dudley had answered. Chapter 157, 155. "Aragog, I'm here to negotiate." Fudge and his party had taken Dumbledore away, and they had dragged Hagrid out from near the Forbidden Forest as well. Before they left, Lucius Malfoy stared at Dudley for a long time. His lips moved, but no harsh words came out. Watching Slytherin rally around Dudley and seeing how Dudley had bypassed him to secure the signatures of the other 11 governors left Lucius with a strange impression. He felt like he was facing that other person, only with Dudley's exaggerated physique. For the first time, he thought he understood Draco a little, if only a little. Dumbledore's removal caused a stir, but Professor McGonagall quickly quelled it. As deputy headmistress, she now held the authority of the head. "Don't worry about what just happened. Dumbledore will be back very soon," she said. I think everyone must be hungry. Please carry on with your meal." The Slytherins recovered the fastest, or perhaps Dumbledore's absence affected them the least. They resumed their seats at the long table with cool composure. After all, the headmaster's chair was empty, but the disciplinary contingent was still present, and Mr. Dursley sat nearby, so things felt controllable. Most surprising was Gilderoy Lockhart, usually so desperate for attention. Today he seemed struck dumb, as if a tongue-tying curse had been cast on him. He ate silently, showing no desire to put on a show. Dudley only glanced in his direction and said nothing more. Dudley lifted his teacup, emptied it, and leaned back, already thinking ahead. Audrina's disappearance didn't shock him. It would have been stranger if she'd stayed. He believed she was still hiding somewhere in Hogwarts because she had not yet struck back. If you were Audrina, what would you do? If you were a Horcrux of Lord Voldemort? Hogwarts was safer than anywhere else, especially with Dumbledore, the only person Voldemort truly feared, no longer in the building. Dudley expected him to return soon. "Stay here," he told the others. After the meal, Dudley escorted Hermione to his private room in the Slytherin quarters. It might not have been the safest place in the castle, but it was where Dudley felt most at ease. "I'm not that weak," Hermione protested. She was annoyed with being told to hide. She would rather act than be sheltered. Dudley ruffled her fluffy, wavy hair. "Of course, my little princess. Your ability now is already on par with the older students about to graduate. But the enemy is a basilisk," she reminded him. "A basilisk that's been alive for 1,000 years. Even if it's weakened, it's no trivial thing. Anyone who meets its eyes dies. An adult wizard has no way but death." Persuading Hermione to stay took Dudley a long time. Before she left his room, he bent close. "Keep Firo with you at all times. If anything breaks into this place, its power can buy us time." Earlier in the forest, Dudley had subdued 3 magical creatures, a mandrake, a niffler, and a creature called Firo. The Firo was currently sealed in a small red and white sphere fastened to Hermione's waist. After he'd given his instructions to her, Dudley went to the Gryffindor common room to brief Harry and the others, then slipped back out of Hogwarts and into the Forbidden Forest. Even in daylight, the forest felt oppressive. The deeper Dudley went, the more it resembled a villain's lair from a fairy tale. The canopy closed in until it blotted out the sky, and sound fell away to almost nothing. There should have been small life, rabbits, insects, but there was nothing. The path narrowed, roots and stumps tangled everywhere, and thorny vines waited to scratch at the careless. A damp mist crept through the trees, dropping the temperature and lending the place a chill dread. "Here," Dudley muttered when he reached a stand of withered branches draped in dense white webs. A faint scuttling came from all around, not leaves, but the rasp of arthropod legs. Then a hiss split the air, a call to companions. The rustling swelled, and from the black, countless pairs of eyes watched him, glittering faintly green. Dudley raised a finger. A pinpoint of light rose from his fingertip, floated upward, then burst, spreading illumination. The ground underfoot was a writhing carpet of spiders, each the size of a draft horse, 8 legs, multiple eyes, thick black hair, massive, looming creatures. They were acromantulas, monstrous spiders usually native to the rainforests of Southeast Asia, classified among the highest levels of dangerous magical creatures. Their venom could kill. They were notoriously communal and vicious, fond of human flesh. Acromantula eggs were Class A contraband and fetched obscene prices. The spiders hissed and clicked their mouthparts at him. Dudley showed no sign of fear, as if he had crossed this threshold many times before. "Aragog," the spiders seemed to call, and one enormous shape detached itself from the tangle of webs. It was bigger than the rest, the size of a small elephant, and the others hissed at it, communicating some urgent message. A hoarse voice rolled through Dudley's mind. "Human." The giant spider's words were crude and guttural. "Not Hagrid. A stranger." Aragog, blind in the conventional sense, but endowed with a keen sense of smell and remarkable intelligence, turned toward Dudley. Then its tone shifted, as if a scent awakened memory. "Wait, I smell something familiar. I will never forget this in my life. It's you. You took my children." This was not Dudley's first visit. In winter, he had come here before for acromantula venom. "Outsider, you are very brave," Aragog said, the clicking of its chelicerae like punctuation. You actually brought yourself to our doorstep. The great spider's mandibles worked. Delicious, sweet human flesh, I will not be polite. Dudley stepped forward, meeting the gleam of countless eyes without flinching. Aragog, I'm here to negotiate. Your friend Hagrid has been taken away because of something that happened 50 years ago. I need your help to find the real culprit. Dudley looked at the massive spider calmly and said bluntly, What happened 50 years ago has nothing to do with me. It's not something we Acromantulas could do, but those foolish wizards were convinced it was Hagrid, that it was me, and so they expelled Hagrid from the school. Aragog rubbed his great pincers together. I can't help him. No wizard will believe what an Acromantula says. It was true then, and it is true now. Of course, Acromantulas, like werewolves and mountain trolls, are classified as extremely dangerous creatures. Hearing himself compared to the mountain troll made Aragog furious. And I know what's in the Chamber of Secrets. A basilisk that has slept for 1,000 years. A sharp shriek cut Dudley off. No, don't say that name. Aragog and the other spiders recoiled several steps at the mention. The basilisk is a natural enemy of all spiders and especially delights in eating Acromantulas. I came hoping you would come with me to find it. No, impossible. That ancient creature is our mortal enemy. Aragog's shriek grew louder at Dudley's words. So, you refuse? Even if Hagrid is in trouble, you choose to do nothing. Dudley continued. You haven't heard my conditions yet. We can't save him. Aragog's two front pincers clicked together sharply. Out of respect for Hagrid, my colony and I have never actively harmed a person. We have suppressed our instincts for 50 years, and I think that's enough. It seems I can only choose other methods. No, I don't think you have the chance to choose other methods. As his words fell, the other Acromantulas began to close in on Dudley, creeping forward inch by inch. Their pincers clacked. Many lamp-black eyes gleamed hungrily on their ugly faces. Aragog, leader of the colony, slowly retreated toward the huge semicircular nest behind him. Dudley showed no sign of fear, treating the swarm as if it were merely a cluster of ants he found amusing. You said you've never actively harmed a person, Dudley said. That's right, but I said actively, and you walked right into it. The calm in Dudley's voice made Aragog uneasy. Age had dulled the older spider's ability to control its brood, and the rule against attacking humans had bred resentment among the younger, hungrier Acromantulas. They craved human flesh. It was in their blood. If Dudley were allowed to leave, some would surely challenge him. Then will you eat me? He asked. Aragog seemed impatient. No, I won't. I never eat humans. Not now, not ever. The conversation ends here, children. Eat him. At Aragog's command, a tide of spiders lunged forward. Tsk, Dudley murmured, pursing his lips. I, for one, hate using violence, whether against people or magical creatures. In the spider's eyes, Dudley suddenly swelled. His body expanded from a small giant into a towering one. I always subdue with virtue, but I never refuse to use violence. With a wet crunch, an Acromantula that leapt at him split cleanly in two under an invisible force. A rippling slashing motion. Snake dance, one of the Zoldyck family's assassination techniques, had cut through the attacker. More spiders rushed in and passed right through Dudley as if he were nothing. In the next instant, he appeared behind them. Silent step, a movement technique based on speed and stealth. The unseen wave struck again, and several more were dismembered before they could react. Crack, crack! Dudley twisted his neck, splayed his fingers, and clenched his fist. The sound that followed was like firecrackers in midair. I'll play with you for a bit, he said. Another wave of attackers lunged. Bang! They exploded, green ichor splattering everywhere. Dudley's simplest move, a punch, turned the nearest spiders into pulp. Soon, he was a meat grinder in human form. Wherever he went, no Acromantula remained whole. The swarm's greatest advantage was its sheer numbers. The so-called spider-sea tactic had allowed them to occupy the forbidden forest and fend off even unicorn herds. But Dudley's techniques were designed to counter mass assaults. He stepped forward, odd and deliberate, left leg, then right. A blur flickered before the spider's eyes, and suddenly one Dudley multiplied into countless identical figures, all moving with the same posture. The Acromantulas, with their limited intellects, couldn't distinguish real from illusion. Rhythm echo, a visual distortion technique, confused their senses. Hisses rose from the swarm. Then sparks of electricity danced over Dudley's skin. Ripple Qigong. A casual slap flattened a nearby spider into a smear of black. His physical strength had improved dramatically since he'd first enrolled. In a fight of raw power, he would now beat Hagrid handily. With Ripple enhancing him, his attributes surged further. Golden ripple light filled his fists. Through the spider's 8 eyes, Dudley seemed to radiate light, and a vague, towering silhouette loomed behind him. Humanoid, powerful, eyes sharp, an aura of gold and purple, like a god looking down on the world. Its features were indistinct but terrifying. Then, Dudley breathed 2 slow words, white mist drifting from between his teeth. Aura, 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 aura! Chapter 159, 157. Acromantulas, you're too dangerous. Dudley unleashed a rapid barrage of punches with both hands. It felt as if 1,000 fists had been thrown at once, sending countless acromantulas tumbling through the air. Ripple barrage. What happened? Aragog, blind, could only hear the mournful screams of his children and the sharp, coppery scent of spider ichor in the air. Panic rose in him, but none of his brood answered. Within moments, a ring had formed around Dudley, with acromantula corpses strewn everywhere. The level 5 acromantulas were utterly helpless. They clicked their mouthparts in fear and instinctively retreated every time Dudley took a step. He glowed faintly with golden light, and the whole clearing seemed to shrink around him. Aragog's voice trembled. He could smell it, the strong scent of blood and death. Dudley's large hand came to rest gently on Aragog's hairy head. Can you hear me now? I think we can continue negotiating. You killed my children. Aragog roared, shocked and enraged, but he dared not move. The hand on his head could crush him with a little force. That was more strength than even Hagrid possessed. Was this being a wizard? It made no sense. Aragog regretted provoking someone so dangerous. You can choose to keep refusing, but I think this Acromantula tribe could be wiped out from the Forbidden Forest today. You're too dangerous. The choice is yours. Dudley smiled, showing a set of unnaturally white teeth. Lockhart's teeth had been flashy. Dudley's were an unyielding, chilling white, like a road roller's imprint. Aragog could not see it, but if he had, he would have known what a smiling demon looked like. Who was really dangerous, he wondered. After a tense silence, Aragog said slowly, I suppose we should hear your terms. Good. Magical creatures could be negotiated with. Dudley nodded, satisfaction warming his face. He had moved up another rung in his art of persuasion. Now he could reason with magical beasts. Hiss! 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 Several large spiders, only slightly smaller than Aragog, leaped forward, bearing poisonous fangs and hissing. Other acromantulas gathered, their voices spitting like dry wind. Hiss! 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 Aragog, you're too soft. Hiss! Hiss! We're stronger than a human. Why should we bow? Hiss! 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 You're no longer fit to lead, old one. You would endanger the whole tribe. Aragog lashed his chelicerae at them, but it meant nothing. These spiders had no intention of listening. Dudley's expression didn't change. It seems your situation isn't good. Your descendants want to usurp you. He withdrew his hand from Aragog's head. You understand? The language of the Acromantulas. I know a little, Dudley said. Magical languages were too useful. As a condition of negotiation, I'll deal with the traitors. He clasped his hands slowly. The transmutation circle on the back of his hands glowed faintly, and the earth answered. Countless hands of packed soil erupted from the ground and seized the rebel Acromantulas, just as the Cornish pixies had been grabbed earlier. Transfiguration could achieve the same effect, but only by a wizard of Professor McGonagall's caliber. This was more earthwork than simple charm. A brief red gleam ran across the Philosopher's Stone ring on Dudley's index finger. The ground beneath him trembled, and small stones began to leap. With a low rumble, a giant hand of earth rose, lifting Dudley with it. As it climbed, the hand grew until it nearly covered the whole tribe. The traitor spiders reacted violently. They bit and sank their fangs into the mud hands, pumping their venom sacs to the fullest. A single drop of Acromantula venom could fell an elephant, but elementals are immune to poison. The mud hands, merely transformed earth, felt nothing. The venom had no effect other than to darken the soil from brownish-black to a green-black sheen. The mud hands had, in effect, become poisonous in color only. The traitors could do nothing but watch. The giant hand crashed down like a lid. Boom, the ground shook. The entire forbidden forest trembled. Even Hogwarts, in the distance, felt a faint shudder. Birds scattered into the sky and magical creatures everywhere turned their heads toward the Acromantula clearing, eyes wide with alarm. In another part of the forest, a centaur peered toward the commotion. "What happened there?" he asked his companions. Another centaur stared at the sky and shook his head. "The stars say nothing." A third snorted and warned Firenze. "Whatever it is, it's not for centaurs. Don't do anything unnecessary." Farther off, a unicorn that had been grazing lifted its head and whinnied, mane bristling. Nearby, a massive Norwegian ridgeback dropped from the trees and landed beside it, an odd pairing. A herbivore and a predator together was unheard of, yet both stood watching, tense but strangely united. Dudley stood on the giant earth hand, arms folded, golden sparks crawling over his skin. Behind him, the phantom image of a vast giant loomed, as if a god had descended. Not a single Acromantula dared approach. Aragog looked up at him, fury and fear tangled together. The tribe hesitated, the rebels ensnared, and the rest cowed. For the moment, the decisions of a very dangerous human were the only ones that mattered in that clearing. Chapter 158, a guaranteed 10 pull? After a surprisingly cordial negotiation with Aragog, leader of the Acromantulas, Dudley emerged from the Forbidden Forest with the spiders enthusiastically escorting him to the edge of their territory. He didn't come out empty-handed. A few Acromantulas were tucked inside a red and white magical creature ball fastened to his waist. That had been the point of the trip. It could have been simpler, but that brood left no room for compromise, so he'd resorted to reason, an approach that, to his surprise, had worked remarkably well. Instead of heading straight back to the castle, Dudley cut across the Forbidden Forest toward its opposite side. He moved quickly. With the eye of data guiding him, the place felt like his own backyard. The Forbidden Forest housed creatures from all across the world. Cerberus from Greece, manticores from Persia, Akamis from East India, let alone mountain trolls and ordinary trolls, unicorns, night riders, centaurs, buckbeak, and more. Rumor even said a sphinx from Egypt lived here. Tales of werewolves and vampires circulated too, though nothing had been confirmed. Dudley sometimes wondered if the founders of Hogwarts had simply dumped their entire menagerie here. How else could so many exotic beasts coexist? Of course, most of these animals had fierce territorial instincts. They rarely left their ranges, and an intruder would normally face an immediate, violent response. Yet as Dudley passed through, no creature attacked. They all chose to ignore him. Magical creatures were sensitive, many very intelligent, and Dudley still smelled of Acromantula blood. That was a good enough reason for everyone to avoid trouble. Not everything here was as stubborn as an Acromantula. He threaded his way past obstacle after obstacle until he reached a plain deep within the forest. Two animals made their home there, a Norwegian ridgeback and a unicorn. "Long time no see, fire dragon, Xiao Ma Bao Li," Dudley greeted them with fondness. "Roar," the ridgeback answered. "Nay," the unicorn replied. The ridgeback lowered its head and nudged the fanny pack at Dudley's waist like a begging dog. Dudley laughed and pulled a bag of kibble from his pouch. The dragon puffed a plume of fire at the sky, then tucked into the food. The unicorn bumped his back with a soft nudge and looked at him with plaintive eyes. "You get some too," Dudley said, digging out another bag. He'd hoped to tame beasts of the ridgeback or unicorn level. If he could, they'd be formidable allies. A basilisk versus a Norwegian ridgeback. Just imagining it was thrilling. With a millennial serpent and Voldemort's Horcruxes likely awaiting him, he had to be prepared. His attention lingered on the unicorn. Dudley reached slowly for its mane, then for its horn. Unicorns were notoriously choosy. They generally refused the touch of men, except for the purest of women. Dudley was an exception. No magical creature resisted the kibble he made. He stroked the horn with a satisfied smile. The unicorn barely glanced at him and went back to eating. He wasn't done. He lifted the unicorn's front hoof and began to rub it. Folklore said touching a unicorn's horn and hooves brought luck, and that was Dudley's goal. From his string of failed lotteries, he'd learned that trivial superstitions wouldn't change his fortunes. He needed something with real blessing to turn the odds. In the meantime, he'd been saving his draws, not squandering them. Now he had a full 10 pulls banked, 2 of them from rectifying the academy, and he intended to make them count. With the unicorn's blessing pressing warmth through his hand, he activated the lottery mode. "Come on, 10 pull," he muttered. The old-fashioned slot machine whirred and began to turn. First pull, Baji Quan LV1. A practical martial art to start with, solid. Second pull, Tai Zuchang Quan LV1. Not bad. He'd rather have the speaker the hero used, but a martial art wasn't useless. Third pull, Wild Ball Fist LV1. Fourth pull, Hungar LV1. Fifth pull, Wing Chun LV1. Another fist technique. Dudley's face clouded. It felt like he'd poked a hornet's nest of boxing skills. He already had one LV5 variant of Baji Quan. Did the machine think his fists were weak and only wanted to feed him more punches? Sixth pull, Volleyball Fist LV1. Seventh pull, one huge scallion. Finally, something that wasn't a fist style. He turned the thick, wrist-sized scallion over in his hands and read the description. A very long, hard stem that could be used to strike vital points. It looked suspiciously like the kind of weapon a certain duck Pokemon might carry. Eighth pull, Den Mushi Production LV1. Ninth pull, Bone Separation and Dislocation Hand, 18 falls, LV2. If there are bones, I can dislocate them for you, the skill blared. Only one pull left. Dudley closed his eyes and forced all his luck into that final attempt. When the machine slowed, a golden glow filled the display. Dudley half heard a voice in his ear, surprised, thrilled. Wow, a golden legend. It was another fist technique, but this was no ordinary one. It was a top-tier style from another world, Cosmic Phantom Beast Fist, Mighty Ox Fist, LV1.